hello again, and welcome to another episode of Sermon B-Sides. My name is Rustin. I'm one of the pastors here at Coram Deo Church, and I'm here with my partner in crime, Pastor John.
Hey, Rustin.
How you doing, man?
My back's killing me.
Yeah,
but it's beautiful outside.
If you guys had seen some of the outtakes of John walking around the building today, you would be like, "Why is he even there?" Because he walks like a granny who needs a walker right now.
Wow. If I could reach over, I'd punch you. But I can't.
Don't make me do my smoker laugh.
Yeah.
Which I don't have a smoker laugh. I just have residual allergy stuff going on in my throat. But also we have.
I think we had to say that.
I know, just to clarify, we are also in the middle of a miraculous April couple of days where we have the sun shining outside.
It feels like July.
Yeah.
I'm sure you guys did stuff outside. We're like first fire pit of the season.
Yeah.
It's like, it's almost 80 degrees. We got the lawn chairs out, like having a margarita at night. I was like, and it's April.
It's what this is. This is the already not yet.
It's already not yet.
Of summer.
This is Washington's cruel tease.
This is Washington's tease. We get one almost every April. Sometimes it's like more into May.
Yeah.
And it's like, hey, summer does exist here, but you only get it for 2 days, and then we're going to give you rain for another month.
Right, because the forecast right now is like starting Friday or Saturday, like rain.
Yeah,
but we got to enjoy it while we can.
We have to, but it is kind of like, it's like you get this little sneak peek in April or May, and then you have rain, and then 5th of July. That's when summer starts.
This last week, and the weather was a reminder of why people in Washington put up with the rain in Inslee.
Yeah. Yes. Well, we are talking today. We're finishing up our conversation about the offices of Christ.
Yeah.
So we're going to be talking today about how Christ is king.
Mm-hmm.
And so... and it's interesting when we look at like the sermon schedule and what's gone on in between today, which is, I think we're I don't know what date it is, the 20th, 21st, 20th, 21st or something of April. But since our last recording, we've had Easter, Good Friday.
Yeah.
We did our King sermon in the offices, and then you also preached on Matthew chapter 28. So a lot of the elements of the kingship of Christ have been covered over the last the sermon series.
Yeah.
And so I thought it'd be kind of neat to just have a conversation about, first, like, what is the biblical office of king, right? Like, because it's really easy we live in post-monarchical times, right? So we don't have a...
That was a nice word.
I just made it up.
Did you just make it up? You did.
I love neologisms. I just, throw them out there. Post-monarchical. It probably is.
Post-monarchical. I bet you that's...
It probably is.
I think so.
So
it sounds too good.
So, but we have kings in history that we can kind of see snapshots of what they were, what they did.
Yep.
And then we kind of have this we have this way, because we live in a post-king society in terms of having them over us as a regular part of our experience, in terms of the role of monarch versus like republics and elected officials. But we don't have, we talk about Jesus as king, and sometimes it takes on this like spiritual-esque mentality where we have separated Jesus the king from the offices of rule and government, such that it's like Jesus being king is a spiritual thing, and the government and the rulers of our land have nothing to do with that, right?
Are you talking about R2K?
I'm not going to go there, but I think what I'm getting at is that there's a disconnect in our minds.
Yeah.
I would love to talk about R2K. That's one of my favorite things to talk about.
It is.
We don't have to go there. But and if you want to know about R2K, just send me an email or something. I'll give you my list of rebuttals.
It's kind of like Y2K, but it's R2K.
Yeah, it's worse. It's worse than Y2K. But I'm just trying to make the point that we don't have a real understanding of the office of king. We're so disconnected from this office, and we've almost spiritualized it to death.
I've got an episode of The Blitz coming up, and I'm going to talk about this with a particular famous Christian author.
Oh, okay.
So you gotta listen to that to get it. But I think,
By the way, plug, if you don't listen to the Blitz, you need to listen to the Blitz. They're just too good to not listen to. And John's not going to say that, but I'll say that.
whatever. So when you think about the offices of Christ, prophet, priest, and king, what you're going to find the majority of people talking, writing about is going to be the sacrifice of Jesus, which is, as a lamb, he shed his blood, he died for us. You're going to see a priestly mediating role. You're going to see the prophet, Jesus speaks the truth. The thing that seems to be so absent, and it produces an anemic
Church.
Christology, and a
church,
is what's missing is the authority of Jesus.
Yeah.
Like, nobody wants to talk about the authority of Christ.
Christ is Lord.
Right. Yeah. And but whether that's intentional or unintentional, we could debate that. But that has become, I think, abundantly clear over the last year, is that we have a Christology. I'm to say we, I mean North America, kind of just evangelicalism, that is really deficient when it comes to the authority of Christ.
Yeah.
So there's certain images of Christ that we love, right? And they are true biblical, like when Jesus, in John's gospel, when he's kneeling down and he's washing his disciples' feet. Like, okay, we love those ones. And in what you see, what I think we see is that people love to grab onto the images of Jesus that our culture is really eager to affirm.
Yeah.
But anything that doesn't fit into that narrative, and authority is one of the things that doesn't fit in that narrative, it ends up getting cast aside. So you end up with a Jesus who's a servant, a Jesus who's kind, a Jesus who forgives, but you don't have a Jesus that has any authority, and consequently you have a church that doesn't have a backbone.
I think that it's also fair to say this is not a novel situation. This is the exact same thing that the early church was dealing with too. Rome didn't mind if you had Jesus on the shelf of gods. I don't mind if you worship Jesus. No way, that's fine. The problem was...
Well, Acts 17, they've got all these different statues to these gods, right? And that's fine.
Yeah, like Rome didn't mind plurality of worship.
Nope.
Rome really cared about if your worship said something about Caesar.
Yeah.
If it said the one you worship is over Caesar, no bueno.
Yeah, there's no room for that.
No room for that. And why? Authority.
Yeah.
Kings fight other kings.
Yeah.
There's an authority battle going on there. And so I think that was one of the primary issues of the church interacting with the world at the time in the first century. And it's not surprising that it's also the same battleground we're on today. The world doesn't mind if we have a Jesus who washes feet.
Yeah.
The world loves that Jesus. The world's
Absolutely.
like, oh yeah, have a Jesus that washes feet, a good moral example. Have a Jesus that says quirky things you can believe in your closet. But do not tell me about the Jesus who has authority over the public square.
Right. I was going to say, do not bring that into the public square.
Yeah, we don't want, like, our state, your religion.
Yeah.
Right? Like,
yes.
That is the exact same stance and posture of Rome that had made conflict with the church in the first century.
Yeah.
So, but
and that was intentional, right? You're not reading that into that. So can we talk Good Friday just for a second?
Yeah.
Because there's one part of that, like one of the interesting things in Matthew's, I think it's Matthew's gospel, and maybe it's more than Matthew, but he tells that there was a sign that was put on the cross, right? And typically what would happen is that the charges of the criminal were put on the cross when they were crucified. So everybody knew what this person was dying for.
I think it's John 19:19. Yeah.
And so, Jesus is King of the Jews, right? But maybe it is John. Maybe I'm getting them mixed up. But there's a specific note that it was written in other languages.
Yes.
And that claim, Jesus was King of the Jews, was written in Greek, would have been the common language, right? It was written in Aramaic, which is what
Yes.
Hebrews would have been speaking, and it was written in Latin.
Yep.
And you got to ask the question, why did they write it in Latin? And Latin was the language of the Roman
Romans.
army.
Yeah. Yeah.
They communicated in Latin. And when Jesus is crucified, the fact that it's written in Latin is a signal to those who enforce the
Yeah.
power of Caesar, right?
Yeah.
And the king.
Yeah.
Like, there's only one king, army. Remember
Yeah.
that.
Yes.
It's a fascinating side note.
And there's one of the things you see happen in Scripture quite a lot, especially in the Gospels and with Jesus and his death and resurrection, is that a lot of times people speak prophetically without knowing it.
Absolutely.
And this is one of the things that I love about this passage.
Yeah.
So I have it
Go there.
top of mind because I love this passage. John 19:19. Pilate also wrote an inscription and put it on the cross. It read, "Jesus of Nazareth, the King of the Jews." Many of the Jews read this inscription, for the place where Jesus was crucified was near the city, and it was written in Aramaic, in Latin, and in Greek. So the chief priests of the Jews said to Pilate, "Do not write the King of the Jews, but rather, this man said, 'I am the King of the Jews.'" But Pilate answered, "What I have written, I have written." There is a significance to that, and to your point, the language is I think that it's one of those things where they're speaking prophetically without knowing it. It says he's the King of the Jews, but it's written to all people, right?
Yes.
The King of the Jews was a king who the coastlands waited for.
Yeah.
We read in Psalms.
Yeah.
He's a king that,
For his law, right?
yes, for his law. They wait for his law. Psalm 2 talks about the nations. Why do they conspire and say, "Let's burst apart his bonds"?
Yeah.
Right? The King of the Jews in Scripture was not a king simply over Israel.
Right.
He was a king whose dominion would take over the dominion of Adam, which was supposed to go over all
Overall.
the earth.
Yeah.
So on top. So you kind of mentioned that the authority piece is missing. I think that there's other conceptions, and without getting into the whole R2K stuff, there's other conceptions of the kingship of Jesus that people have that I think we should dismantle. And one of those is people think that Jesus is prophet and priest, and he's going to be king.
Mm-hmm.
Okay?
Yeah.
Meaning, and this is, I don't know if you guys have heard this narrative. I hope you haven't, because it's just not good. But there's a narrative that says, yeah, Jesus showed up to be king, right? But he was rejected. And so then you have inserted into history this parentheses, right? The parentheses of Jesus was rejected as king, and now you have this church. He dies on the cross, and then there's the church period. And one day he will come again, and a Jew will be king, right, over the earth, right?
Yeah.
It's the classic kind of like dispensational understanding of it's the classical dispensational understanding of like the failure of Jesus to be king. Like he shows up, the sinfulness of man rejects him, and then he will someday come as king.
Right.
He's not king now.
Yeah.
He's not ruling now.
It's like he forgot the ascension,
Yes.
and he's seated at the right hand, and that which Paul talks about in Ephesians, like he ascended. That movement of ascending is really important. Like in Psalm 110, like what is his Messiah, his Christ doing? He's sitting at his right hand, and his enemies are becoming his footstool.
Yeah.
That's happening.
Yes. And here's what people do to that ascension thing, okay? They hear that and they say, well, he's not sitting on David's throne. David's throne is located in Jerusalem, and he's got to come back down to Jerusalem and reign there.
Yeah.
And I look at them and I think, you think that Jesus is going to sit on a lesser throne that he's sitting on now? Like, Psalms talks about how God's throne is in the heavens and it rules over all the nations.
Yeah.
Like, the point, the David's throne thing is too geographically centric.
Yeah.
That defense of this inaccurate vision of the kingship of Jesus is too geographically focused. The point of it being David's throne is that it's the king, the son of David.
Yeah, the line of David.
Yeah. if the king sits on a throne anywhere and he's David, it's David's throne.
Yeah.
He's of the line of the throne of David.
Yeah.
So, but we do that because I think the reason why that view is popular, at least it was popular for me growing up. I kind of hope it's dying, but it seems like it might be. But one of the reasons why I think that's popular is that people look around and they say, Jesus is king? Really? Right? So there's a tension between this notion that Jesus is ruling and is king and has authority and what we see.
Yeah.
And they see that tension and say, if he was ruling as king, it wouldn't be this way.
Yeah.
And I think that that's super faulty.
Yeah, can I interject a little bit?
Yes, please.
I think I disagree it's faulty, but I also think they're not looking at things, actually. Mm-hmm. So if you go back to the crucifixion, resurrection, ascension, like when Luke picks that story up in the book of Acts, there's 120 people in one town.
Yeah.
Right? What does it look like for this king to rule the earth? Well, he promised them that they would be his witnesses and that they would receive power from the Holy Spirit, and it'd be Jerusalem, Judea, Samaria, to the ends of the earth. What has happened in the last 2,000 years? The ends of the earth.
Yes.
The king is expanding his kingdom and his reign. Does that mean everything's perfect? No, absolutely not. But you can't look at the last 2,000 years of church history and say, oh, the church has just been beat down and man, there's no evidence of Christ reigning. No, the exact opposite is true. The church has gone from a very small group of people and one community to a global reality. There are Christians all over the earth. That's what it looks like for the king to reign.
I can't remember if I've said this on B-Sides before, but it's worth saying again. There are more Christians in the world today, more people who say Jesus is king and they bow to him as Lord, than there were people in existence.
Total people.
In the first century. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. There are more Christians today in the world than there were people in existence in the first century. And so, but this notion here of when the people look at the world and they see, what? He's not ruling. I think that criticism comes from a place that rejects the idea that God would choose to work in time with progress. Okay, so and one of the reasons I think that that's biblically faulty in the first place is that the whole Bible tells a story of God working in time and through progress.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Like why didn't Jesus just show up first thing right after the fall? Why? Why didn't he just show up? Like, that's what they needed, right?
Yeah.
The death of Jesus. Why didn't he show up? God's plan is revealed and unfolded over time, and it progresses, and it gets clearer. Yeah. And that's not an aberration to the story just because of the fall either.
Yeah.
Adam, who's the first king, the first one who has dominion that God delegates to him.
Yeah, to subdue.
He's given dominion, the dominion that is God's. Mm-hmm. He's the first Adam.
He's
right?
viceroy.
He's that's a good term for it, viceroy. But
viceroy
he's given
makes cigarettes. Did you know that?
Does it really?
There's cigarette. Sorry.
Smoker that. But Adam is going in he has a direction to go into.
Yes.
He has a cultural mandate and a command to take dominion, to subdue the earth, and to be fruitful and multiply. That never changes. Mm-hmm. That plan is God's plan. His plan is fill the earth with people who are my image bearers, who reflect my glory. Glorify the earth through your multiplication and your subduing of it.
Yeah.
That is the original plan before the fall. And it's progressive.
Yes.
God creates a world that with this idea of a progression built in. And I want to make a quick distinction. Progressive, not progressivist.
Yes.
There's huge problems with the progressivist understanding.
Right.
When I say progressivist, I think that what people do is they say, see, God is changing. God never changes.
Yeah.
But God has built his creation in such a way that a seed goes into the earth, and it slowly has a blade of grass that comes up, and then it grows into a full shape, and then it has a flower, and then it has fruit. God has built his creation with progressions in it.
Yeah.
And so His creation is built that way from the very beginning with people in mind. And the first Adam fails miserably as the first king. He fails to defend the garden.
Right.
He fails to crush the head of the serpent who's going after his wife.
He fails to rule with wisdom and truth.
He fails to rule. That's exactly. So the second Adam picks up where the first Adam left off.
Yeah.
And he defeats the enemies. He crushes the head of the serpent. And that's a theme we see developed throughout the Old Testament.
Yeah.
I'm still teaching Exodus with the youth. And we just...
How many years is this?
we're a year and a half now in Exodus. But we just got through Exodus chapter 14. And Exodus chapter 14 is like the climactic final crushing of the Egyptians, right?
Yeah.
And there you see on display there God fighting for his people. God who is king fighting for his people.
Yeah.
And they're panicking when they see the Egyptians come. But the Exodus is really a story of a battle between two kings. It's a story between who's king, Pharaoh or me. And what's interesting is that Pharaoh's symbol of authority, you know what it was? Serpent.
Yeah.
He had a go look up Pharaoh's crown, Pharaoh's turban, and always had his symbol of authority was a serpent. Isn't that interesting?
Yeah, because isn't the first like miracle that happens with Moses is the staffs?
Yes.
Right.
Yep.
And so his turns into a serpent and it eats their serpent.
Exactly. So there's so many echoes of Eden happening in Exodus.
Yeah.
And it's Exodus itself is echoing what's happening with Christ.
Yes.
It's a prefiguring of that.
Yes.
So, but Christ is the king who rules, and yet he ascends and he has a body. He's our head who has ascended, and yet he has commissioned his church to proclaim his gospel, his declaration that he rules and reigns.
Yeah.
We're ambassadors.
Right.
So there's when somebody looks around and says, well, he's not ruling, I'm like, would you say the same thing to Adam? Because the whole world isn't filled with people? It's like, no.
Yeah.
It's like, there was a plan. The plan was be fruitful and multiply, spread. And you preached recently on Matthew 28.
Yeah.
What does Matthew 28 tell us?
All authority in heaven and on earth has been given unto me. Right.
Go.
So therefore, go.
Yes.
Yeah. You have it very much echoes, and this is where it rubs up against the R2K, because the R2K people. We need to do a thing on R2K.
We do need to do
it.
a thing on
R2K. Anyways, maybe we shouldn't get there. It just echoes what God is saying to Adam in the garden, that he's supposed to go, subdue, and he's supposed to multiply.
Yeah.
Right? And so Jesus says, all authority in heaven and earth has been given unto me. And then the marching orders to the church is to go and teach.
Yes.
Everybody to obey what I have commanded, right? So you have the king has commanded, he's spoken. He sent out his servants, the church, and they are to teach and to baptize. But all of that falls under the very first thing that Jesus says, which is when in the sermon, I was like, this is the thing nobody talks about when it comes to this verse. But this is all built upon the reality that all authority in heaven and earth has been given to Christ. Not that it will be, like you pointed out earlier, but that right now, all authority in heaven and on earth has been given unto Christ. He is sitting at the right hand of the Father. His enemies are being subdued, under his feet. The last enemy to be subdued will be death. That will be destroyed in the future. But right now, Christ is ruling and reigning. And that really, I think it really transforms the way we think about things like evangelism and preaching in the church. Like what we're proclaiming is the lordship of Christ.
Yes.
And there's all sorts of implications that come downstream from that reality. And I think what so often happens is people focus on all the implications and the downstream things, which are all true and beautiful and good, but they miss the all authority in heaven and on earth.
Yeah.
Right? And so it's like you end up with this kind of privatized personal faith that, one day when I die, this stuff is going to matter.
Yeah.
But right now, I'm just kind of waiting.
And there's a kind of concession to pluralism that happens within that mindset. Not to say that when I say concession to pluralism, I mean not that pluralism isn't the world within which God has given us in order to operate and work, and that there's certain ramifications of that. But I mean, it's a concession to this idea that that is the best case scenario. The best case scenario is or not the best outcome is lots of people who believe different things and who bow to different gods.
Yeah.
That's good. It's
Yeah.
like, I think that is a situation in which we are called to be faithful, but it is not. That is not. That should make us weep.
Yes.
It should make us weep that there are that our neighbors don't know Christ.
Yeah.
And we shouldn't just be like, that's just part of the ultimate good, is that we live in a pluralist situation.
Yeah.
It's like, no, it's not good that your neighbor is rebelling against the King of Kings.
Yeah. Yeah.
Like, so, but
religious liberty is
yes,
good.
Yes, and that's what I mean by like the context
Yeah.
we are in is one wherein we absolutely have all the grounds. I think Christianity is the only source of this. We have all the grounds for religious liberty because God is patient, and God has called us to love.
Yeah. Yeah.
And He's called us not to lord it over people, right?
Yep.
And God wants real conviction from people. He wants people to actually come to a knowledge of Him and bow to Him. There's a scene in one of the Gospels where I think that some of the disciples are getting frustrated because of the Pharisees or something are, very antagonistic, and they're kind of like, why don't you do something about it, right?
Yeah.
And He says something like, let the blind lead their own blind, they will fall into a ditch, right?
Yeah.
Jesus there just gave us a picture of religious freedom.
Yeah.
Right? He just said religious freedom is twofold. One, an opportunity for this commission
Yeah.
to go and teach the nations.
Yep.
But it's also it's also a thy will be done to the rebels, and say if you want to persist in rebellion, you will fall into the pit. And we're not gonna save you from your own will there.
Right.
We want you to see Christ as glorious and beautiful and bow to Him.
Yeah.
So religious liberty is the only context wherein you can have both those things.
Yeah.
Where you can have room for God's judgment that is actually letting people do what they want.
Yeah. Yeah.
But also room for calling people to a real conviction of coming to know Christ. You can't do that without religious liberty.
Right.
So
Absolutely.
But to say that pluralism is a goal, meaning we should be totally content with our neighbors never coming to know Christ as though that was a good, is a completely faulty understanding.
Right.
The contra-biblical, contra-lordship of Christ.
Yeah.
And I think that that's an important distinction to make, because we kind of just want to be lazy anyways, and so we justify
That's a good word.
not having those conversations because we kind of have idealized this thing that our pluralist culture idealizes anyways. So we have to live in that tension of yes, liberty, but no, this is sad.
Yeah. And that tension, it's like you find tension whenever you're looking at the story. Like we want it to be one way or the other, but sometimes it's both. Like, so when you're thinking about, so on our notes, it's like Good Friday and Easter, right?
Yeah.
There you have it right there.
Yes.
Like, what kind of king is this? Well, this is the kind of king who goes to the grave.
Yeah.
He takes death for his enemies, right? But he's also the kind of king who defeats death and will come back in judgment for those who reject him in his kingdom.
Yep.
Right?
Yes.
It's not one or the other. It's both and you got to have both of those pictured. The king who lays down his life and the king who is raised, whose name is above all names, right?
Yep.
That every knee would bow, every tongue will confess that Christ is Lord. Like that's where we're headed. He's Lord of all. He has all authority in heaven and on earth. And like I said earlier, there's a tendency to pick out the images of Jesus as servant. And clearly, he did not come to be served, but to serve, right? And to give his life as a ransom for many. So that's true. But it's not true if you isolate it as the only thing.
Yes.
Right?
Yep.
There's this both and reality. And we were, was it staff devotions last week where in Revelations where it talks about the wrath of the Lamb?
Yeah.
And I just thought now that is an image that does not fit what so many people want to envision Jesus.
What does it mean?
Jesus is a lamb,
The
right?
wrath of the Lamb. Like, That does not. Yeah, you're right. That does not paint. That does not fit our pictures of bifurcating the lamb versus the king or
Yeah.
the and that's, I think that's, you went in your sermon, I think it was last week or it was on, I don't know, recently. I don't know where it was, but the Colossians passage about he triumphed over
Yeah.
them, over his enemies
Exposing them to open shame
in the cross,
in
the
the cross.
resurrection.
Yeah.
So the cross, which is Jesus's quintessential, like, lamb-like, right? He was like a lamb being led to the slaughter, did not
Yep.
open his mouth.
Yep.
The cross was a disarming. It was,
A
what is,
revealing,
Yeah.
a public exposing.
Yes.
Yeah.
But-
and defeating.
and what disarming is, to disarm the enemy is a military act.
Mm-hmm.
It's to remove them of their ability to fight so that you can
Yeah.
conquer them.
Yeah.
And I think that's what you see in, so to go back to Exodus, that's what you see in Exodus. God, through the plagues, is patient
Yeah.
with Egypt.
Oh, for sure. Yeah.
And
Yeah.
he's also disarming them.
And he says throughout the narrative that why is he doing this? Why does he send in Moses? But then he tells Moses that he's going to harden Pharaoh's heart. Why is he doing this? So if all of Egypt may know that I am God.
Yes. That is the theme. And yeah, so the Exodus 14 is this crazy climactic thing. I just was thinking about it recently, and God, when they're finally leaving, God makes them camp. He makes them camp so that they wait for Egypt to chase them,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah. Why would you do that?
Why would you do that? So that when they chase them, they're lured into the Red Sea, and God's act of rescue is also an act of conquering.
Yeah. Yeah.
And they now no longer have the Egyptians to fear.
Mm-hmm.
When the dust is on the horizon and the chariots are all coming after the Israelites,
Yeah.
they're panicking, they're afraid. They
Yeah.
want to go back to slavery because of that fear.
Yeah.
And then God, or Moses tells them, fear not, stand firm. Just see the salvation God will work for you today. All you have to do is be quiet.
Yeah.
Be silent.
It's the hardest thing, isn't it?
So they just like, what? God provides a way through the Red Sea, and he crushes Egypt and he frees them. But that salvation, that Red Sea moment, is both a complete disarming and triumphing, while at the same time being a rescue operation. And that's what we see in the cross.
Yeah.
It's a complete triumph over the weapons of the world. Hebrews 2 says he, through death, destroyed the one who had the power of death,
Yeah.
the
Yep.
devil,
Yep.
in order to free those who were subject to the fear of slavery, or slavery to fear,
Yeah.
fear
Yeah.
of death. So there is that kind of the fear of Egyptians that takes place in Exodus, that's relieved by God's saving act, and now they don't longer fear the Egyptians anymore, they fear God. That happens to us in the cross.
Yes. Yeah. And so we got to close this, but
Yeah.
can I say one thing as
Yes.
we close? So this would be an encouragement to those of you guys who are watching this. The book of Revelation is part of the Bible.
Yes.
Did you know that?
Yeah, it is, yeah.
And it's one of those books that we tend to shy away of because we don't know what to do with it. But I just finished reading the Old Testament. I'm like, oh, what am I going to do now? I was like, I'll just read Revelation. So I just every day I'd read 5 chapters. And I got to the end of it. I'm like, what am I going to do now? I was like, I'm going to read it over. I'm just going to keep reading Revelation over and over
Yeah.
again for a while.
Yeah.
And one of the things that's very clear is you've got John, who's on this island, and churches are suffering. Things are going well, right? And what is the apocalypse? What is the revealing of things that John needs to see to give his churches hope? And it is a robust, 200 proof images of God's judgment
Yeah.
and the lordship of Christ.
Yeah.
And I was like, I think this is a moment. I think part of what we're experiencing is we just haven't paid very much attention to Revelation. So we get 3 years of Jesus's life and the death and the resurrection, and then he ascends, and then kind of But Revelation pulls back the veil, and you see battle and all of this stuff going on, and whatever all of the different images mean, the one thing that is consistent throughout the whole thing is that Christ is Lord, and he rules, and the beast is defeated, and death is defeated, and all the forces. We need a little bit more of that in our diet, I think.
Jesus saying, take heart, right?
Yes.
Take heart, do not fear, for I have overcome the world.
Yeah.
Right?
The wrath of the Lamb.
Yeah, that's good.
Yeah.
Well, I think that's a good word to end on. Jesus is king. Jesus is the mighty one and warrior. He's the man.
Amen.
He's the man of war who defeats his enemies, and yet yet he's also the Lamb who converts enemies into friends and brothers and sisters.
Yeah.
So we hope you guys enjoyed hanging out with us today. If you have questions, as usual, you can always write us an email at pastor@corumdeochurch.org. But until next time, trust Christ, go to church, and love your neighbor. See ya.
See ya.